It was a stark contrast the president painted today. Mid-morning, he headed to CIA headquarters for Gina Haspel's swearing in as the new head of the agency, praising its personnel with accolades like these.
It is a true honor to stand here today before the most elite intelligence professionals on the planet Earth. Nobody even close.
And yet, just hours earlier, Trump is on the attack against one of Haspel's predecessors, suggesting that former CIA Director John Brennan was responsible for starting the Russia investigation. The president loosely quoted a former Secret Service agent and conservative commentator on Fox and Friends, tweeting, "Brennan is panicking. He has disgraced himself. He has disgraced the country. He has disgraced the entire intelligence community. He is the one man who is largely responsible for the destruction of America's faith in the intelligence community." And then there's the matter of Trump's claims that the FBI sent in a spy to infiltrate his 2016 presidential campaign for political purposes, and his demand that the DOJ investigate the situation. That was reportedly high on the list of issues to address this afternoon at a previously planned meeting between Trump, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, National Intelligence Director Dan Coats, FBI Director Christopher Wray, and Chief of Staff John Kelly. As for my previously planned meeting, I'm joined now by Nancy Gertner, retired federal judge and senior lecturer at Harvard Law School. Judge, it's good to see you.
Good to be
Attorney
here.
Don Stern, who was appointed by President Clinton and worked alongside Robert Mueller, both during his stint with the Department of Justice and in private practice at Hale and Dorr, former U.S. attorney from this region. Good to see you, Don.
Yeah, thank you.
So Trump says an informant was embedded in his campaign. It appears that's not true. But what is true is that a confidential source did gather information on his campaign about possible relations with Russia. Isn't the president onto something here about a line having been crossed, or no?
You know, there's two responses he could have had. One is, oh my God, someone in my campaign was working with Russia. I'm glad you followed through on that. The other is, oh my God, they're surveying my campaign. The latter is actually a guilty approach to this, which is extraordinary.
Do you have a problem with this as a former U.S. attorney, especially with something as sensitive as a presidential campaign?
Well, it's hard to know what the true facts are. If the FBI placed a confidential informant inside the campaign,
which appears not to have been true,
to gather information about the campaign for political purposes, that would be inappropriate. If, on the other hand, which I think is closer to what actually happened, they had a confidential informant based upon investigative efforts to determine to what extent there were Russian ties and to what extent the law was broken based upon facts, that not only is appropriate, but it's par for the course. And for the Trump to, or for anybody to be criticizing that kind of approach, right, would be to undermine every drug investigation, every public corruption investigation, every investigation involving conspiracy in the United States.
But when you think about it, I mean, it's what we know so far. We don't know a lot, but we think it's somebody relatively lesser in the campaign. So the notion that he's getting indignant about that is extraordinary.
Well, lesser to the point that at least one of these people has been indicted, and some of the Papadopoulos and some of the people investigated. When Trump demands, and I think that's the key word, that his own Department of Justice investigate something, and apparently based on press release that came out this afternoon, Rosenstein has acceded to the demand, at least to the point where the Inspector General will look at that. Is he crossing a constitutional line?
Whether it's a constitutional line is an open question. These are certainly constitutional norms. In other words, there's nothing in the Constitution that says the Department of Justice is arguably is part of the executive, not arguably part of the executive. He's part of the executive. But the line has always been it is an independent agency. He also, by saying what he's saying, provides additional justification for an independent counsel. In other words, he can't see the difference between himself and the DOJ.
But I want to stay on this. If it's not a constitutional issue, is it merely, and merely is probably a poor choice of words, a violation of historical protocol? Because as you said, it's part of the executive branch. It's, quote, his Justice Department. He's not ordering an outcome. He's ordering an investigation. So even if you feel queasy about it,
well, actually, I mean, I wonder whether or not, I hadn't thought of this before, but whether it could be part of the pastiche of an obstruction of justice here, which is that his belief that they are, in fact, after him is motivating all of this.
Do you have a problem with him demanding this of his own DOJ, Department of Justice?
You know, it's hard to see it in isolation. So if, for example, a president were to say, you know, I've read in the newspaper about, you know, the importation of guns into North Dakota, I think the Justice Department ought to investigate it. That is a broader kind of problem And I think the chief executive, the president, certainly it's appropriate to say to the Department of Justice, I think you should look into it. But as Nancy points out, this is not only very, very specific and very narrow, but it has to do with him. Has to do with him and has to do with an ongoing investigation.
So again, it makes you feel queasy too, but he hasn't crossed any formal line, has he?
But when you describe it as protocol, it makes it sound like, whether the teacup should be served in quite the same way. This is the undermining of a very important institutional line in our society.
Speaking of the line, can we go to the other side for a minute? Should Rosenstein even have agreed to his demand? Well,
there are two parts of what I think Rosenstein agreed to. One was have the Inspector General broaden an ongoing and existing investigation to look at this allegation. I personally don't have any problem with that, and I have great respect for the IG, Michael Horowitz. The other part was apparently to broaden the opportunity for congressional leaders to look at highly classified information. We don't know what that information is, but if it has to do with the investigation, that is very troubling to me.
Well, somebody, Ben Wittes, I think that's how you pronounce his name, from the Brookings Foundation, tweeted about this. I have a whole lot to say about how the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, I assume it's in part what you're talking about, Nunes, and the President of the United States teamed up to out an intelligence source who aided our country in a properly predicated counterintelligence investigation against the hostile foreign power. Paul Krugman tweeted in response to that from the New York Times, we've basically crossed the line into treason now, and a whole party is acquiescing. I assume what he's talking about is the fact that his friends, Daily Caller, which is a very conservative website, in part, I guess, in response to the president, outed this guy. I mean, the world now knows. The New York Times didn't tell. The Washington Post didn't tell. Other outlets. Is that treason rhetoric, or is that?
I don't know whether I would call it treason or not. That sort of.
What is it?
It's dangerous, is what I would describe it as dangerous, because the ability for law enforcement, for the intelligence community to protect human sources, which is the best information that we can get in any kind of investigation, a 9/11 kind of investigation or any kind of terrorist investigation, to basically willy-nilly out those sources and be oblivious. And by the way, when the congressional leaders sit down to look at classified information, you tell me, but I put probably 5 or 10 minutes before it's all over the media.
Well, wait a minute. I mean, if this was a confidential source,
which it was,
if the information was classified, if someone leaked classified information, then that's a crime. Whether the crime amounts to treason, I guess, would sort of be whether it was, again, part and parcel of an effort to stop the Russian investigation. But as an isolated act, the irony of that, I mean, he was concerned about, treason for Hillary because of things in the emails. This is outing a classified source if that's what's going on.
Do you two ever go home, considering what you did for a living, sitting on your couch at night and saying, like, in one day, well, the answer is yes, obviously, based upon, okay.
I throw things at the television.
Can we just change gears but talk legality again for a second? Don Jr., yet again, is in the news for yet another Trump Tower meeting. This one apparently with a number of people, including an emissary for two nations in the Middle East, the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. It is in violation of law, I assume most people at home know, for a foreign country to attempt to get involved in an election. The mere fact of the meeting, because we don't know whether anything was executed as a result, the mere fact of the meeting in and of itself is not a crime. It may be poor judgment, but it's not a crime to have met with these people, even if their avowed intention was to help his father win the presidential election. Is that correct or not?
I think that's probably the case. On the other hand, if you know what their avowed intention is, and you know that that's the purpose of the meeting, and you go to the meeting, you come pretty close to wanting to invite and accept information from them to help the campaign.
I mean Don Jr.
Don Jr.
That he may have violated the law in addition to the foreign. What law might he have violated?
Well, if he's receiving direct aid on a political campaign, he was an important part of the campaign.
Of course he was.
So if he was receiving direct aid and information as part of an effort to influence the campaign, it might violate some criminal law.
But this is something I've said before. I believe that anything that happened between the time Trump announced for the presidency and the time he actually was elected is bound to be an incredible bounty of information, because none of them believed that they were actually going to be elected. And so
even if they did, this is not atypical for how they run their business.
Well, that's right,
operation.
but that's why I would imagine for Mueller that there's a motherlode of things that people said. So, I mean, Don is right. If it was, I'll have a conversation with the UAE, and boy, let's see what they have to say, that would be one thing. But if it is, you take notes and you make sure there's a transcript, and yes, this will be great, then you get closer along to an illegal act.
We don't know the latter.
We don't know that.
Before we go in 30 seconds, you were part of litigation against the Trump administration.
I am
right
now. I represent individuals from the Hillary campaign whose personal Social Security numbers and whose sexual preference in one case was leaked during the WikiLeaks dump. And the allegation here is that when WikiLeaks and the Russians knew when and where to leak this stuff, they were in complicity with the Trump campaign. So it's a civil suit for invasion of privacy in D.C. now.
If a newspaper did the same thing you allege the Trump administration did, would you sue them too?
I would never sue a newspaper.
No, I'm serious about that. Is that any different?
Well, if the newspaper does it here, this would have to be a leak for the purpose of hurting these people. Mm-hmm. That's what the premise of invasion of privacy is. It's not just the fact of the leak. There would have to be a leak with intent.
Keep us up to speed.
I will.
Judge Gertner, it's good to see you. Don Stern, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.